You are listening to the Manument Podcast. My name is Casey, and I'm here with my buddy Glenn Johnson, investment advisor and founder of Jabez Financial right here in the Uncasville area. In every episode, he is here to break down today's biggest retirement worries and headlines for us. We're going to talk 401k catch-ups. We've got some more Medicare talk as open enrollment is fully underway, and we'll talk about the importance of paying our future selves first. Before we get to all that, though, we want to make sure that you know how to get in touch with us. If you've been wondering whether your retirement plan is still on track, 860-288-9977 is our phone number. And Glenn has set aside 5 spots on his calendar for a complimentary introductory conversation exclusively for our radio listeners this week. Glenn, can you talk to us real quick about what this introductory meeting looks like? What can folks expect when they get a spot on your calendar?
You know, some of my favorite first appointments is when somebody just comes in, sits down at the table, and we get to have a conversation. We're not pulling out financial documents and tax returns and all that good stuff. My favorite appointments are when people come in and they tell me their story. I want to hear people's story. I want to hear what your life's experience has been like and how you got to where you are and what you're looking forward to in the future, so we can start to get on the same page. When I meet with people and I get to hear what they've experienced and the wisdom that they've accumulated over the years, it makes for such a great dialogue, and it connects us and gets us on the same page long before we get into the financial stuff, which oftentimes can just be boring.
Well, and I just want to make sure that our listeners know there is no obligation attached to this offer. This is just a conversation. You can sit down with Glenn right here in his office. He's just down the street from Mohegan Sun. So give us a call, 860-288-9977. We are standing by right now to take your call. Claim your spot while we've got them. That number one more time, 860-288-9977. Or if online is better for you, you can find us at jabezfinancial.com. And that is Jabez, Jabez. And you can get connected with us that way. All right, Glenn, let's dive in. We talk about Warren Buffett a good bit on the show. And he once said, do not save what is left after spending, but spend what is left after saving. In other words, pay yourself first by putting money in savings and investments before you do anything else. And that's great advice if you're younger, but how can we apply this quote, Glenn, to retirement so we can pay our future selves first?
Well, you know, it's a great question, because sometimes when we think about paying yourself first, am I being greedy or am I being responsible? Obviously, you don't want to rob from your future self. So we want to keep the first things first. And so for me personally, that's my first things first is my tithe, because it's not my money anyway, which I've experienced to be one of the best investments out there, actually, just not keeping what doesn't belong to you. But then after that, we want to start with knowing what our best investment is. Our best investment is always investing in yourself, getting yourself better, getting yourself more equipped to be able to solve bigger and more significant problems for other people. And in that process, when we recognize our purpose, then we need to get the education we need to be able to develop the skill sets to be able to perform. That's not to discount the importance of building our character and our emotional stability and maturity as well. Because think about a surgeon. You know, the surgeon, obviously they're smart enough to know what they need to do, but we also expect them to be emotionally stable and consistent and balanced to be able to perform their tasks correctly and effectively. Where it comes to saving and spending, you know, I don't pretend to tell people how they should spend their money or what they should spend their money on, because my belief is that if you've earned it, you have every right to decide where it goes and who gets to keep it, who gets to enjoy the benefit of it. But I can help you put together a strategy so that it's there when you want it and it's there when you need it. It's a matter of establishing the right financial systems so that you don't put yourself behind the 8 ball when you don't have time to recover. Because while you're working, sure, if you're spending every dime of your paycheck while you're working, things seem to be okay because you still have money coming in and going out. Cash flow is fine. But there does reach a point when we're no longer working. Then what? Then we don't necessarily have time to recover. So we have to consider what things are going to be like down the road, and will there be enough assets there so that I can continue living the way I'm supposed to live?
I think a lot of folks who spend decades accumulating those savings suddenly find themselves kind of hesitant to tap into it, almost as if it's off limits once they enter retirement. So I wanted to ask you this, Glenn. Are there any psychological or behavioral shifts retirees should consider to start viewing their retirement savings more like a regular paycheck rather than just a big lump sum that they're too nervous to touch?
Absolutely. Because we spend the majority of our lifetime, like all these working years, saving and saving and saving. And so when we've developed that muscle memory of saving, we think that we have to carry that same habit into retirement. Well, and maybe in some cases you have to. Maybe there's not enough there. But for those that have accumulated enough assets, there's another muscle that needs development. And that is how to distribute the funds that you've accumulated over the years. And so when there's assets in place that provide us enough consistent income to pay all of our fixed expenses, then there's money left over. And with that money left over, a lot of times people say, well, I'm just going to leave that to somebody. Okay, well, if you're going to leave that to somebody, what might you like them to do with it? How would you like them to benefit? So we want to be able to increase our creativity as to what are all the good things that can get accomplished with the funds that you've accumulated over the years. Are there any charities or causes or people that you want to help support? That's why I say here at the office, we have a program even through our church called the Haiti Hope Program, where we sponsor a bunch of kids in Haiti, and 100% of the money actually gets to the kids. There's no administration fees. And for $23 a month, you can sponsor a child in Haiti, and every red cent goes to help these kids. That's something I thoroughly enjoy investing my money into. And as time goes on, when we get into retirement, we want to start thinking about those things where, who would I want to help? How would I want to bless them?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're thinking about retirement and you felt hesitant ever to spend in your retirement, know that you're not alone. I think this is probably one of the most common concerns that Glenn hears from his clients in his office. And the good news is you guys can work together to build a plan that gives you permission to enjoy what you've worked so hard for without worrying about running out. An introductory meeting with Glenn is the perfect place for you to start. 860-288-9977 is our phone number. And we've got those 5 spots set aside for our radio listeners to meet with Glenn. No pressure, no obligation, no judgment. This is just a conversation to see where you stand and how you can move forward with confidence. 860-288-9977 is what you need to dial. You can sit down with Glenn in his office in Uncasville. One more time, that number for you, 860-288-9977, or visit us at jabezfinancial.com to learn more. All right, Glenn, the Federal Reserve met again earlier this week, and recently, Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee made a good point to CNBC. Take a listen.
Our job at the Fed is to act, and the market's job is to react, and let's not get the order mixed up. So what the market expects is not in the Fed's mandate. What should be in the decision of the Fed are the economic conditions, unemployment and inflation. Rates can afford to come down over time in a gradual basis, a fair amount from where they are now. But this uptick of inflation that we've been seeing, coupled with payroll jobs numbers deteriorating, have put the central bank in a bit of a sticky spot.
So the Fed doesn't react to every headline. So I wanted to ask you, Glenn, do you encourage retirees to take that same approach with their investments?
Yeah, well, this is a great audio clip because it completely exemplifies the fact that the Fed believes that they are in charge of the markets. And that the markets are supposed to respond to what the Fed dictates. It's incredible. It's right in your face that they think that the Fed and the big banks are in charge of things and not the free enterprise system. They kind of are, because the debtor is enslaved to the lender, right? And so the banks kind of are in charge of some of this stuff, but it's not supposed to be that way. Businesses in the free enterprise system and the capitalist system that we have here in the United States, that's what's supposed to run things. And the banks are there to support it and encourage economic growth for business. But there's a big power struggle between big banks, the government, and the free markets. Now, we only have authority over our own household and what we do personally. And so that's why we don't want to get caught up in the mix of all the emotional headlines of what the Fed's going to do next. We should most definitely be aware of it. We should stay in tune to it. But we don't need to just react to things, but we don't want to have our head in the sand either. So we want to be aware of what economic cycle we're in and what economic cycle we're headed into next. And we think of how the government's role in this, and we talk about all the trillions of dollars that they've injected into the market by borrowing and borrowing and borrowing more and more from the Fed. In fact, there's a deficit. When people say, like, for example, when people say we have a federal deficit of nearly $2 trillion, well, what does that mean? It's hard to picture. Well, let's look at it this way. The federal government spends about $7 trillion a year, and they take in about $5 trillion a year. So their negative cash flow is $2 trillion, and that $2 trillion is just adding to increased deficit. That's why we're in such a massive, massive debt bubble. I mean, think about that on a household scale. If your household had a $50,000 a year income and $70,000 a year in expenses, how long could that last? The Fed just keeps lending more and more to the government. The government keeps spending more and more. And obviously, nobody thinks we should ever cut our expenses, but they're spending 70 and they're taking in 50. It's not sustainable. So should we be paying attention to what the Fed has to say with their headlines? Yeah, but we should also realize it's the free market, the free enterprise system that's supposed to be in charge of things and not the Fed. See, these are the kinds of conversations I like to have with my clients. And I can say this, when we sit down and have a conversation about some of this stuff, what I refer to as a Sesame Street version of this stuff. And it's so exciting to see the light click on in people's eyes and they say, you know what, I finally get it. Because most of the time when people sit down with a financial advisor, they're just looking at their portfolio and say, we're going to diversify and here's your bottom line. How much risk do you want to have? And that's what you get. There's no real substance as to why people are recommending what they're recommending. But I like to go through a process where people understand why we're making the decisions we're making. So I invite you to give us a call at 860-288-9977 and come in for a conversation. Like I said, we can have a conversation about your story, where you're coming from. And we can also talk about some of the mechanics of what's going on in the economy. And we can make that fun. We can make that interesting. But where it comes to understanding all the details on this, I assume the responsibility for that. That's my job. What my clients count on me to really understand what's going on with not just the economy and the news cycles and what the Fed's doing, but to be able to process it and communicate it in such a way that you can understand it and make better decisions for yourself. Give us a call at 860-288-9977, and let's have a conversation about this. And I can say with absolute certainty, by the time we're done, you'll be feeling a lot more optimistic about what's to come.
Yes, Glenn can help you understand. He can give you the Sesame Street version. I love that. This is your chance to sit down with someone who truly understands the retirement landscape, but understands that retirement landscape also locally. Glenn's been helping families in Connecticut for years. He wants to do the same for you. So take advantage while we've still got some spots available. That phone number for you again is 860-288-9977. One more time, that's 860-288-9977. Or you can always find us online. We are at jabezfinancial.com, and you can get started that way. You are listening to the Manument Radio Show. I'm here with Glenn Johnson, founder of Jabez Financial right here in Uncasville, and he is answering our big retirement questions today. And if you ask people how much they need to save for retirement, many might answer $1 million. But how many people actually make it to that number? Well, the answer is 3.2%. So does that mean that 97% of retirees are miserable? Well, no, nearly 80% report that retirement meets or exceeds their expectations. So my question for you, Glenn, is what is your message to the person who has saved but is still grinding away at work in their mid-60s because they don't think that they've saved enough?
Yeah, well, a lot of times people say, well, I need to save $1 million. Is $1 million enough? And I say, well, no. So I jokingly say, no, you don't need $1 million. You need 10. Right.
Right. That'll make it easier.
Right. The thing is, it's all about cash flow. and quality of life. And like for example, I've got a client that between his Social Security, I think he's living on maybe $1,300 a month.
Hmm.
And he is completely financially independent and wealthy because he only spends $1,000 a month.
Wow.
So if that works for him, I remember meeting with him once and I asked him, I said, well, why don't you get a television? He said, well, why should I get a television? I have a radio and the station I listen to comes in. So that's enough.
He's got a good signal at the house. He's good.
Yeah, so there's that. And then I've got clients that if they're not just frivolously spending a couple $100,000 a year, they're not living the way they want to live. So it's across the board. So the idea is we want to be able to identify what kind of lifestyle you want to be living in retirement and then find out how much it costs. And it doesn't cost a set amount of money like $500,000, $1 million, 10 million, whatever it is. What it costs is cash flow. We've got to look at, do you have the assets producing enough income streams to maintain the lifestyle you want to live? And when you reach a point where you're either choosing not to work, you're physically not able to work, or you're not allowed to work. There reaches a point where we're no longer trading time for money. And that's the date that we want to be prepared for. And sometimes it comes at a date of our choosing, and sometimes it's forced upon us. So we have to be mindful of making sure that we can control the things that we can control and not just leave everything to chance. So when people have this concern about, do I have enough money to retire? When I sit down and go through things with my clients, across the board, people are so encouraged when they realize that 95% of the time, they are okay. They do have enough. They do have enough as long as they implement the right cash flow systems in retirement. It's not just about having the right product or the right investment, but having the right systems in place. And once you actually see it, when you actually see how it actually is going to work out, it gives you a whole new sense of freedom to say, you know what, I've got something to look forward to now, and things are going to work because I've got the right systems in place. Now, without those systems, you do have, sometimes I joke, I say, you have enough here, but you could blow it. You could royally screw it up. And sometimes it only makes that one really bad decision that blows it out of the water. So that's why we want to make sure we have the right systems in place so we don't get knocked out in retirement.
Well, let me ask you this, Glenn. If most retirees are not hitting that $1 million mark, but they still feel satisfied in their retirement, what does that say about how we define enough for retirement?
Well, this is where enough is relative. For example, if every single person had $1 million, now $1 million doesn't worth anything anymore.
Right.
Your wealth is not just measured in how many dollars you have, but how many you have compared to the next guy. So when he was talking about 3-point-something% of people retire with $1 million, okay, well, you know what? Not everybody's going to retire in the top 3%. You know how many will? 3%. That's it. So really what we want to do is make sure that we're ahead of where we want to be relatively. And a good point is, because there's two ways of increasing your wealth. Like take a billionaire, for example. If a billionaire wants to double his wealth, he's got two ways to do it. You could either go get another billion, or he could find everybody that has $1 million and turn their $1 million into 500,000. Either way, he's doubled his wealth. So this is why when we're walking into the market and we're playing against the big boys out there, we're stepping into the boxing ring with Mike Tyson, we've got to realize that not everybody's going to win. When someone wins, someone else loses. So we want to make sure that we have the right defensive strategy in place so that we don't get knocked out, because that's how you can blow your retirement, just by getting knocked out when a bubble bursts. But also recognize that, you know what, we're a lot better off than we thought we were, and we can maintain that great position with the right financial systems.
We can't really define enough as a number. It's about what you want life to look like after you finish working. And that is where Glenn comes in. He is helping people right here in Connecticut build plans that are not just about surviving retirement. They are about living it to the fullest. So if you're wondering whether you're on track or you just want to talk through what enough looks like for you, this is your chance. Be one of our first 5 callers today, 860-288-9977 is how you reach us. We'll find you a spot on Glenn's calendar for that complimentary introductory conversation. 860-288-9977 is that number for you again. Take advantage of this opportunity. I'll say that number one more time for you, 860-288-9977, or you can always find us online. We are at jabezfinancial.com, and that's Jabez, Jabez. All right, Glenn, the Fed's recent interest rate cut did very little to lower mortgage rates. In fact, after a slight dip, they're back up again. And now Google says searches for help with my mortgage are at their highest since the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. So what lessons do you think, Glenn, from that moment in history should today's retirees apply to avoid some financial pain?
You know, the real estate bubble and interest rates, they're almost identical to where they were in 2008. But a lot of times, so much time has passed, people don't remember, or they don't want to remember. They dismiss it because things have been so great from 2009 to today. But you know what? And most financial asset managers and money managers, they're still banging the drum of get in the market, stay in the market, stay in the market. You don't want to get out because what if you miss that one big day? Well, you know what? We've got to recognize what season we're in. You know, what would it be like if you were investing from 1982 and then by the time 1997 rolled around, you decided, you know what? I see this tech bubble here, I'm getting out. And then you missed out on those last 3 good years of that tech bubble. But then it burst. How would you feel if you got out in 97, you missed out on the very peak, but you didn't experience the downside afterward? Probably pretty good. How about if you got back in after the dot-com bubble and you rode it all the way up and again, and you got out in 2006 and you missed out on those last couple of years of the real estate bubble leading up to '08? How disappointed would you be if you missed out on that very peak, but you avoided the big crash afterward? Well, this is what we've got to think about now. Are we trying to grab every last red cent of growth that we can get out of this massive bubble that we've been in from 2009 to today? Or do we want to recognize that something's got to give? There's too much debt. We haven't had a recession since the Great Recession of 2008. We've just about had this long bull run ever since. So how much is enough? And this is where I'm of the mindset that it's kind of like you've gone to the casino, you've gambled, and you've won. Walk away from the table without trying to get that last $2 or $3 of the uptick. Lock in those gains, realize the gains, but then after it corrects, get back in. You know, there's a lot of good fundamental changes going on in the economy right now. And whether it be with permanent tax law changes, foreign investment into the United States, companies promising to build factories and hire more people here. There's lots of good things happening, but that doesn't mean the bubble can't burst in the meantime. Because if we look at what happened after 2008, after the real estate bubble, and the Fed dropped rates and they started injecting cash into the market and they were artificially propping it up, we think, well, boy, during that time, the stock market was doing great. But the mechanics of the economy weren't. I mean, think about it. If the Fed lowers rates, companies borrow money, they buy back their stocks, so they're not paying dividends, and which drives up their share price. That makes the stock market go up. But does that mean they've hired any new employees and they're producing more? No, it didn't help the middle class. It helped the shareholders. So the stock market can go up where the middle class their quality of life isn't improving, but at the same time, we can have the middle class, their quality of life can improve while the stock market comes down, which is the next season we have to be going into. Now, this is where having a conversation with a financial advisor becomes so very important. And you also want to make sure you're talking with a financial advisor that's aware of these types of things. I met with a financial advisor last week, and essentially, he's just beating the drum of sitting down with a client saying, look, there's never been a 15-year time period where the market hasn't done well. You don't want to miss out on that big day. Just stay in the market, stay in the market. I mean, talk about drinking the market's Kool-Aid. Just give us our money and you never get it back, and eventually it'll come back. Well, you know what? There's a season for that. There's a season to be in and there's a season to be cautious. So I invite you to give us a call at 860-288-9977. and come in for a conversation. Let's have a conversation about this. I'd love to hear your perspective and your ideas on this so that when it comes to making financial decisions for yourself, whatever conclusion you come to, you'll feel good about it. It'll eliminate the stress and the anxiety you have around what's happening or what could potentially happen. But I want you feeling good about where you are by making smart decisions based upon facts and not just overexcitement that we're hearing about in the media.
Well, speaking of stocks and booms and missing out, Glenn, everyone on Wall Street is looking for that next high-flying stock. And sure, they make great headlines, but you got to read the story below the headline. So I want to talk about the car retailer Carvana for a moment. They'll buy your car or sell you a car online and even deliver it straight to your house, which sounds like a great service. And during 2023, shares of Carvana rose by more than 1,000%. So stopping there, you might want to buy its stock. But if you look at how Carvana ended that same year, they still were down 86% from record highs 2 years earlier. Now, most people buy a stock or decide on a 401k fund by looking at past performance. So I wanted to use this example to ask you, Glenn, what is wrong with that practice and how can you help people do better?
Almost everything is wrong with that practice because we recognize when a company is selling stock, they've come up with a story. They're trying to raise capital. And their story's got to be a good one because they want to have enthusiastic investors say, you know what, this is a mission I want to be a part of. I want to get in on this because this is gonna win big. And if a company that's selling stock and raising capital, if they don't have a really exciting story, they should get out of the business. I mean, they're supposed to have an exciting story. If they don't have an exciting story about where they're going and where they're headed and what they're looking forward to, they need to be doing something else, something that they can get excited about. But that's the point. When we find these individual stocks, companies that really may be onto something, and they have all that growth potential, there comes a point where all that excitement needs to be backed up with results. And if the companies don't start earning money, at some point, the investors are going to bail. So that's why you find these stocks, the share prices will go up through the roof out of excitement. But if they don't end up turning a profit and actually earning some money, at some point, investors cut their losses and get out. And that's what plummets the stock. So you think about why Warren Buffett has so much money sitting in cash right now, over $380 billion or $384, something like that, $billion. Why does he have so much money sitting in cash? Because all these stocks are overpriced. It's no secret that we're in this bubble. So when we're trying to find that isolated stock that takes off and does well, we're really looking for that little winner in a pile of stocks that are overwhelmingly overpriced. So I don't want to try to time it just right.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Manument Podcast. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts so that you never miss an episode, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Investment advisory services offered through Jabez Financial, LLC, a registered investment advisor firm. Registration is not an endorsement by securities regulators. By contacting us, you may be provided with information about insurance products, including annuities offered through Glenn Johnson, Connecticut Insurance, license number 4628409. The firms are separate entities. Annuity guarantees rely on the financial strength and claims-paying ability of the issuing insurance company and are not offered by Jabez Financial, LLC. Read your contract for restrictions, limitations, or penalties. Jabez Financial, LLC is not licensed in all 50 states. To find out if Jabez Financial, LLC is licensed in your state, please call 860-390-0093.